Hi, Marie. How are you doing?
I'm good. Caught me taking a sneaky drink of water.
So I wanted to just do a quick, brief introduction. You are a police officer, or you retired police officer?
I'm transitioning.
Transitioning. Okay, and you're also
We-
a Irish crime novelist.
That's right. I write crime set in Ireland. Yeah, psychological thrillers, gangland thrillers. That's sitting with the agent at the moment. There's nothing quite published yet, but it's on the cusp. So emerging at that stage. Yeah, I'm in the
That's
waiting room for that.
that's exciting. Actually, it's a lot of work behind writing a full novel.
Yeah, 90,000 words, and you don't think you will, and then you are several thousand. You're 2,000 words in. You think, God, I have to make to 8, and next thing you've 80,000. And you go, where did that come from? And then when you read back, it's interesting and amazing, but the story carries you on. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that way. If it's a good enough story, it'll carry you on. You usually figure around 10, 15,000 words, whether it's going somewhere or not.
Yeah. I mean, I personally tried to write books, not novels, more of these business style books. And every time I get started, I get through, maybe halfway through the first chapter, and then it becomes a dead project. So I don't know. I don't know how you had the discipline, that determination to actually get through the entire book. That's I tip my hat for that, definitely. You also have gotten a certification in post-trauma growth,
Yeah.
and this has become, especially in the Middle East, and I'll openly say this because I think that it needs to be addressed. In the Middle East, we tend to, have psychology, have psychological illnesses and disorders be a very taboo subject. Which is it's getting better now, and we're growing through. We're in a growth phase where it's becoming more public. It's being discussed, and I find it fascinating that we can have you here and we can talk about a traumatic experience and what we can do as people who haven't been through it to help others get through it and not necessarily recover, but at least live with that lingering kind of sense of that stress that we had experienced.
Absolutely, and the idea, the concept of it was around. Oh, it's really recent. The idea of growing from great suffering brings great learning is ancient, but actually addressing the theory around post-trauma growth started to be developed in the 90s. And in certain areas, then people picked up that study from two academics called Tedeschi and Calhoun, and they developed in around 1999 a post-traumatic growth inventory. So it was the concept that growth was measurable, and you could attribute certain growth to certain traumas. Then we'll say in around the 2013, people started looking growth, post-trauma growth for, we'll say, bereaved parents. And interestingly, actually, some of the lead thinkers in this and the PhD students and academics have gone through a certain trauma themselves, and they have seen the growth, and they have learned from it themselves, and they've developed it from their own observations and their own learnings. And actually, interestingly, I didn't realize I went through a post-trauma growth until I started to study it. Wow. I was doing my higher diploma in coaching psychology. I took on post-trauma growth as an aspect to zone in on. I did my project on coaching for post-trauma growth and coaching for bereaved parents. And in my study of it, I realized I had gone through it. I had suffered PTSD for an injury in the line of duty as a police officer. Interestingly, the crime writing came out of that. And that's why it's an intrinsic part of my makeup, because I started writing for therapy. It was getting out of the bed, into the car, driving. My injury in the line of duty was a head-on collision. I was driving a patrol car, and getting into a car was traumatic. Going outside the door was traumatic. being in spaces, open spaces, closed spaces, all that was traumatic. The writing actually was a catalyst to me getting out, getting into the car, being around people, being in public, and dealing with anxieties. And I continued to write, and hence signed with an agent. And, that was kind of, oh my God, this happened. But these were all tiny steps in a growth process that I didn't identify until I started studying it myself. Right. And I realized the power of this. I realized the power of a growth, the idea that, there can be a change in a person as a result of a struggle with a highly challenging experience. And a lot of people, as you said, we need to open the conversation around trauma. People are very afraid of that word. Because what is it? What is a trauma? A trauma is something significant enough that causes such an imbalance in your life that it changes your regular day-to-day living. It causes a significant disruption, be it a loss, be it a grief, be it a breakup, be it, something. It doesn't have to be a bereavement. It can be a divorce. It can be, there's a range.
Any life-changing situation.
Life-changing situation that's significant enough for someone to sit back and be really, really affected by it.
Yeah, but sorry, I don't mind. I'm sorry for interrupting, but you mentioned that you didn't realize that you had experienced that PTSD. And that makes it a little bit harder for people to even support you if you don't recognize it yourself. So I think just to at one point from my end is that I think that having an awareness that everyone is going through something. Everyone's going through some sort of stress. It could be as simple as a financial situation, and it could be as intense as return from military duty and combat, and they might not recognize it themselves. They might think that they're doing perfectly well, and sometimes you would have someone start screaming while they're sleeping, and you won't see that in the workplace. You won't see them dealing with that. So understanding that everyone's dealing with the stress, I think we need to be more empathetic and a lot less, treat each other like human beings, basically, rather than yelling and demanding and so on. Everything is a request at the end of the day, and everyone's at liberty to make their own decisions. Sorry, I just wanted to go off into that tangent, but another thing that was curious for me was when you were in the line of duty and that event had happened. Did you acknowledge that you had that PTSD in that moment, or was it just get out of it?
The PTSD, I would say, diagnosis came after it. It was the development, and it was the coping I had with the aftermath of this incident that could have taken my life, basically. It was the head-on collision, and was crushed into a car, and it changed the trajectory of my career. And it was that realization that when you're sitting there going, it was the sudden realization that things are never going to be the same. And then when I got the PTSD diagnosis, that made sense. And when I started studying the post-trauma growth, the emergence from it then made sense. And the drive, I suppose, to be better at X, Y, and Z, or improve at something, or that I could realign my thinking. And the intrinsic thing for me was, and looking back in hindsight now, I can identify a point at which I took up the writing because I knew that I was limited in what I could do as a frontline worker, and I had to find something else I would be good at, because that was my nature. I had to find something else that I would be good at, that I would be rewarded for, and hence taking on the coaching and the post-trauma studies. Again, finding something that I could be good at. It's that drive forward that you never lose. If you've had that, you won't lose that. You won't lose that because of a trauma. You won't lose the way you are. The trauma it happens to you. It isn't you. You are not the trauma. You are not the grief. You are not the stress. you know, the stress is there with you. It's on you. It's like there's an Irish saying, "Tá brón orm." The sadness is on you. It's not you. It's, you know, it's part of you that you can park and move and sit beside. You carry it along in your life. I said I remember saying to a coaching client one time, there's three people here. There's the person you were before the trauma. There's the person you are now because of it. And it's the person you're going to be with it. And you're taking everything you've had all along, all of the good, bad, and the ugly, or who you are now in this very moment, because that's the moment that matters, and you're carrying all that forward. So
Right.
it's the post-trauma growth is the idea of how you can carry that trauma forward to be you with that trauma and in spite of it, not because of it, but in spite of it. And it's not for one moment leaving behind your experience of it, but it's finding a way, we'll say, a pocket in your jacket to simplify it a bit. It's finding a bag big enough to carry it until it's reduced enough for it to fit in your handbag or fit in your man bag or your wallet or your pocket.
Right.
But you take it from the burdensome weighted sack that's full of rocks to like, it's still there. It can be maybe folded into a more manageable, a more hand luggage, if you like. So it's that carrying forward, and it's finding the ability to carry yourself forward in spite of that trauma and carrying it forward with you. It will never be you. It doesn't define you. It changes the way your outlook. You know, and I'm speaking from a personal point of view. Like it changes your outlook, and everybody is different. And if you can carry that forward and still have strength, and it's not resilience, it's more than resilience. Resilience is just bouncing back from something, whereas the post-trauma growth is that growing in spite of the trauma. It's funny, and it's not an easy road. It's not you wake up one morning and everything is fine. No, there's steps you have to take, and there's a road you have to go down, and you know, there's stops and starts and different things, but it's doable. And that's the important thing. It is a journey. It is a door you can open, and it's a path you can walk. If you choose to walk that path, if you're ready to walk that path, and if you wish to walk that path. Some people aren't ready, and when they're not ready, then that's when they need to stay where they are, regain keep it counseling or whatever methods they use to cope with what they have dealt with. And then what if they've enough counseling? What if they've exhausted the need for counseling to an extent that further counseling won't
It'll be
serve
counterproductive.
them? Exactly. It won't serve them, and it won't make you progress, and it won't grow. So what do you do then? What do you do if you've exhausted the coaching and you're sitting there and you've all the coping abilities to deal with your trauma, and you're sitting there currently, and now you need a sense of direction? That's where the post-trauma coaching comes in. Your sense of direction to move forward with what you've learned and how to cope with your abilities to cope.
Right.
So you don't sit in the trauma, you carry it forward. And I suppose I'd help you find the appropriate luggage in which to carry it.
Yeah, and there comes a point where I feel like, you know, attending these therapy sessions, especially when the progress stops, it's really just keeping the wound open, you know.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's about learning how to live with it and in spite of it. So I've actually heard of cases where people have come through a PTSD episode, or sorry, not an episode, they've been through a traumatic experience, and then they actually not only continued in spite of it, but they actually started using it as fuel to launch their careers, and such as you have done in a manner of speaking. You've literally gotten the certification in post-traumatic stress, and I mean, that's a big fuel factor, whether you know, according to what you said, whether you realize it or not. I'm sure that was a big factor in leading you in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I was drawn to it because I have over 2 decades of experience as a police officer. You're landing into someone in a most traumatic situation, and in that traumatic situation, you have to find those words, because all your senses are heightened. So whatever anybody says, does, you know, you may not remember, you remember the bad things, you remember negative things someone has said. So we've always had to find, as police officers, we've always had to find the way to be in the trauma. So that's where I don't have a problem. That's an advantage in a way, because I don't have a problem sitting in a room if trauma presents itself. You know, that's half the battle. It's the whole, you know, don't shy away from it. It's part of the person. That's like saying, oh, don't bring your arm in, don't bring your foot in. You know, it's part of the person. You know, it's not functioning like a limb, but at the same time, it's part of the person. It's part of their makeup. And if they're there and then, which is the there and then of what has happened to them, impacts on their here and now, and it is the cause of them not moving forward, then it's relevant. And it's relevant in the conversation, and it's relevant to be addressed. And like, it's opening that conversation around trauma. And as a coach, if you're afraid to sit in a room with a bereavement or with a trauma, then that's where, you know, maybe you shouldn't tackle that until you're ready. And so as over that 2 decades of experience, landing into a traumatic experience, and I suppose finding a way to kind of center yourself to know what to do. And then I suppose my own trauma in the crash, I've had own personal trauma beyond that, which is probably a topic for another day. But what I will say is my particular focus on a project for coaching post-trauma for bereaved parents, that, you know, that is relevant to me. And that is very, and, you know, a lot of people are afraid to sit in a room with that kind of grief or with that kind of trauma. And I think it's finding a way to open that dialogue with people. And again, like, if you're like that for managers, and that if you are dealing with someone who is returning to work after a particularly traumatic experience, like miscarriage, like baby loss, or like bereavement, family bereavement, friend bereavement, anything like that, as a manager, you need to know, you need to put on your empathy, you know, you need your empathy hat, and you need to know how to properly integrate a person back into a workplace, because their lives will have changed. They'll have altered. You know, you have to be mindful of the words you use, the terminologies. For example, you know, there's no point using words like at least when they're still in what if and if only.
Yes.
You know, because your at least could be extremely damaging to their, you know, and they're 2 words, and they're 2 words that can, you know, 2 words there, which it's a preface to.
Oh, you know, that actually triggered a thought for me here. You know, you have that manly mentality where it's like, oh, just get up and deal with it. You know, like, you know, why are you complaining? Just keep going. You know,
Yeah,
and
brush it off. Yeah.
And to a point, okay, fine. Like, I've learned to embrace a little bit of that manly attitude, but I don't impose it on others by any means. You know, everyone deals with stress and recovery in their own way, and if it works for them, it does. As long as they're not, you know, obviously taking into, you know, abusing drugs or escaping reality. You know.
Yeah.
And that's actually another direction that we can talk about. I mean, if you see people, let's say, abusing a drug or abusing a certain, even a sport, if you abuse, you can damage yourself just as easily as you could with anything else. So people tend to use these things, and a coping mechanism is fine as long as it doesn't become an escape of reality.
Yes.
And there's this very fine line between it.
It's wanting to drive forward by any means possible, is that fine line. I mean, me with the writing and being therapeutic, and then I'm gone so far as having an agent nearly signing a deal. The escape into that imaginary world, and I suppose writing about gangland stuff was a weird escape. And then thinking back on it, it was the drive to prove that I could be good at something else. But there was a point where I had to recognize, was it becoming obsessive? Was I spending every spare minute doing this? And what was my real intention and real motivation? And that's the point at which it shifted for me. And I really had to think about what was my motivation behind this. And then I made the logic decision that I wanted to move forward with this in a professional way, signing with the agent and getting published, you know, and going that way. That was a conscious decision. That wasn't this will solve everything. You know, if I get
Right.
this deal, if I get sent, this
Right.
is going to solve everything, and this is going to melt away everything I've dealt with, and this is going to be the new me. There, you know, that's not, and it's the wherewithal to realize that that's not the answer. And it I suppose it's the mindfulness of sitting with the trauma and sitting in who you are now and where you're at and where you're at because of what you've dealt with, you know, and then you can make the logical decisions to move forward. It's like turning to drink or turning to drugs or turning to an obsessive behavior, I suppose, in order to shut out facing the trauma. You will then constantly stay in this loop of not moving forward. It's the loop of you're building this partition around yourself and you're not letting anything in. And there's a danger then that it will climb over the top and it will find you anyway.
And then you're trapped.
You're trapped. And
Yeah.
And you're finding that way out, and then you're back to where you were. And wherever you find your means to do your therapy, you know, when you do it is the right time for you. But by doing, like, let's say, by sitting in that obsessive behavior or denial, maybe, you're delaying that progress. But then you have to be ready. Then you have to, if that's what you need to do to get where you need to go in order to, you know, to move yourself forward, then that's what you need to do for you. And it's people that's surrounding you that needs to be aware to identify where they can step in and where they can support. And they're like, you know, like saying to someone, I know how you feel. No, nobody knows how anybody feels. Like you and I could have walked the same route. We could have experienced the same thing, but your thoughts are subjective. Mine are subjective.
Yes.
We've autonomy over ourselves, and there are no two thoughts that are ever the same, even
Right.
if they were on the same track. So you can never say to someone, I know how you feel. You can identify with an experience. You can identify with an experience and you can empathize, but you can't know how someone feels. Like right. I hear that different things.
Well, you know,
the Irish are gas with them. Not sure I know how you feel. You think that's bad? Wait till I tell you this.
Oh no, I think that's universal, regardless of Ireland or Jordan or wherever we might be. Everyone's ready to just, you know, one out the person they're talking to, even if it's something negative. It's
and especially, and I've seen in the police force as well, like you have members coming back from horrific things, and you're going, I remember the time something worse happened. Wait till I tell you that, and your colleague is there, and all they need is just the kind of, you know, get yourself a cup of tea there, you'll be fine, you know.
Right. It's kind of an interesting competitive environment, right?
Yes.
So one thing that crossed my mind here was that, you know, saying that I know how you feel, for me seems like a conversation filler when they're uncomfortable, you know, or when they don't know what to say. It's just, I know how you feel. When I think a lot of the time people forget to acknowledge that silence sometimes is better than saying anything, and maybe it's more supportive just simply listening and not responding and just nod your head. Sometimes that's enough help, and you don't need to do more than that.
No, you don't. And it's interesting. I'm doing a master's in mindfulness to teach mindfulness, which I hope to incorporate into the coaching. And silence is a huge part of it. We do active classes where you go into groups of twos, and one is silent for 5 minutes while the other talks about a particular situation. And when I say silent, there are no reactions, there are no ums and no anything like that. And the pressure off you when you're someone tells you don't have to respond is huge. It's hugely relieving. And I think we want to jump in and we want to help and we want to fix and we want to say, I know how you feel, and it'll be fine. And saying I know how you feel is fine if you have the emotional intelligence to judge the room, judge the scenario, judge the person's feelings, their body language, their reaction. If your emotional intelligence is tuned in enough for you to say that, and it'll land in a way with the person, that's fine.
But a lot of the time, I feel we get in this habit, especially in the work environment, where there's a problem with the system, we fix it. There's this, we fix it.
Oh, yeah.
But in terms of humans, not everything can be fixed, and not everything should. A lot of the negative experiences that I've had in my life, I've learned to embrace and learn from, and actually grow from as well. As contradictory as it might seem, it depends on how you take the negative experience and what you do with it. It doesn't have to be all bad consistently for the rest of your life. It's just a matter of understanding that it's not something to fix. It's something to adapt to.
Yeah, and if people surrounding you and supporting you are given that release that they're not required to fix, then they become better listeners, and they become better in the silence and holding the silence and holding the space for someone to be what they need to be in that moment. Just like if they need to fall apart, that's fine. They can fall apart knowing that you're there to help them pick up the pieces. And another day they could be fine, and they could be the ones holding you together. Mm-hmm. Just because you've suffered trauma, you can laugh and you can be there for somebody else. You can still do that. And in fact, distraction is quite good. And sometimes showing up for someone else can be a therapy in itself, because you feel, people aren't, stepping, on eggshells around you or something like that. And interesting, that leads me to another question, is the loaded question, I suppose, as a manager as well, in workplaces or non-workplaces, is the how are you question. That is weighted so much. And it's one thing you should never ask unless you're prepared for the answer to be anything other, than I'm fine.
The number of times I have said that exact sentence,
how are you?
They always say "kifak" in Arabic, which is "how are you?" So it's really short compared to "how are you?" But
yeah.
So sometimes they say "how are you?" and you see that it's a genuine question, and you feel like it is. So you start to give a genuine response, and they go, "No, you should say that. Hey, everything's good." And I'm like, "Don't tell me what I should say. If anything, you shouldn't ask me that question if you're not prepared for my answer."
Yeah, it is. That is a hugely weighted question. And especially if someone was, say, returning from work or back into your group or environment, having suffered a trauma, the how are you question is loaded. And it really is, unless you're prepared to be that proper listener, how is your emotional intelligence high enough to deal with the answer? Can you be empathetic, not sympathetic? Can you listen? Can you be the person that listens? I mean, you can show empathy without asking that question. You can show it in actions. You can reframe the question. I hope you're doing okay considering what you've dealt with. I wish you strength. There are other ways of saying how are you, but the asking the how are you question is just loaded if you're not prepared for the answer. How do you think I am? Do you not realize what I've gone through? Fuck's sake.
Yeah. Well, there's multiple perspectives to be sought out here. I mean, as the manager, you can't really know what someone went through. So yes. It's kind of unfair for the person who's been through the PTSD to assume that, they know as well.
Exactly.
But also there's a really intense amount of undiscussed, and it's not brought to the topic. They say that the new management style should be coaching, and that means that before you go to work, you got to wake up early. Not just wake up, not get out of bed, but I'm saying like really wake up. Maybe go for a run, because your responsibility is not only the financial benefit of an organization, it's also, is your team mentally there? How can I support the team? Asking the how are you means really sitting down and listening when they respond. It means taking that extra effort. It means being the father figure or the mother figure in the business. And I know a lot of people don't like that term, that reference, but it's true. You have to be the role model. You have to be the person that I am here to support the team, and that should be the role of the manager with PTSD related issues. You know, if you're hiring people with disabilities, it's the same situation. You got to be willing to go the extra mile to give them a winning environment for them to succeed at the job you've hired them for.
Exactly, because you want the best productive member of staff that you want, that you need, that you want them in their state of flow. I mean, the state of flow, it's recorded that you use 10% of your brain, you're 500% more productive when you're in that Csikszentmihalyi state of flow, where your skill set meets the requirements of you in the job. So you stick trauma into the middle of that causes that little imbalance. All it might take is taking that few minutes to go, how are you? And properly listen and make sure the person is heard, then that could set them up for the day, because they know then that, right, okay, this person hears me. They properly hear me. They may never have to come back to you for anything. There may be a day that they may have to come back to you, or a month, or it may take longer than that. But it's that acknowledgement and knowing that the how are you question is followed by a proper listening and a proper response and an empathetic ear. Then it's like I say, that managers need PEC. They need patience, empathy, and compassion.
Yes.
And without that, then, and even if the emotional intelligence of the manager is low on the scale, they need to learn how to be that way. They need to learn, you know, they need to learn. They need to have their guides. They need to have their 5 things I need to know, like 5 things I shouldn't say, you know, 5 things that, you know, this kind of thing. We're all in numbers and we're all in top 3 things of doing that. So what are the 5 things I shouldn't say? What are the 3 things I need to do? Patience, empathy, and compassion. So if my emotional intelligence level is low and I'm dealing with numbers and I'm pressure at the end of the month and someone's coming back and they're after dealing with something traumatic, if I take a breath and I have my passion, empathy, and compassion, I can get more out of that employee to be a productive member of the company and staff. And that way then, you know, I've my job done. I can carry on knowing that, you know, I've that area covered. So that's, you know, it's down to that. If it doesn't come naturally to you, learn how to do it. You know,
I think this is, you know, a common mistake within organizations where you know, we put so much pressure on the cash flow. We put so much pressure on, and this, we're talking, of course, the for-profit, the private sector. You know, they put so much pressure on results, financially speaking, that they forget about the unquantifiable things that you need to be checking in with, right? So let's say, and I've mentioned this before on this talk, is you have a salesperson that's normally getting every single target. They're doing every single thing right. And then all of a sudden, for maybe a month or 2 months go by where he's barely even there mentally when he's at the office. And instead of checking in and asking, how are you doing or what's going on, they start to give him warnings. They start to let him go. You know, they fire him. And the thing is, if you asked, how are you doing? It might be something that's not work related. It might be something at home that he's really struggling with. Maybe it's a traumatic experience. But when you know that, you can help him recover faster and then get back into the game, right? And then, you know, get his A game back, you know. But if you're not asking, how are you? It's financially, in terms of like a private sector kind of style of business. But not only that, if you want your team to have their A game every single day, you need to check in. You're spending more time with the people at the office than you are spending time with your own family. So if you check in with your family and you're expected of that, you should definitely be expected to check in with the people who are managing your objectives, your business, your general goal or mission. I'm sorry, that was my perspective.
No, you're absolutely right. There was one particular international company that a co-student of mine actually works for, and the coaching intervention in that company was seen as 2 steps away from a disciplinary procedure. And she's actually reframed that now to be what we can do to move forward as that, you know, because the the business coaching, the professional coaching, like that, like they're three parties. I'm gone blank on the word now. The co-parties. So we'll say you have, when I'm coaching someone one-to-one, it's personal coaching. In a business, it's the company and the person, and you're the factor in the middle that helps both of them find that smooth way forward. And like that now, with someone returning with there's another big company that's after introducing extra leave when you've dealt with the trauma of miscarriage and pregnancy loss, extra counselling. But to go one step further, to introduce the coaching, is that bridge to educate the line manager, educate the person, the supervisor above, and then the smoother transition in. Because, you know, and you're providing the stuff for the member of staff, and then if you provide it for the managers and educate them, and then it broadens out. It then becomes habitual. It becomes the norm. It becomes the environment, and it becomes an environment of a safe place to be, to be yourself, to be your authentic self, in order for you to move forward. So I like that now. And the flow used to be quantifiable. Really, it was I think Csikszentmihalyi did quantify it in the end, but it was a McKinsey study, actually, in the last a 10-year study that put the quantity on flow. And as I said, that's where your skill set meets the challenge, and that's where it gets you 500 times more productive with 10% use of your brain. Now that is just powerful. You're doing something, you know, it's like if you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But okay, you're going into work and okay, you might love it, but is your skill set meeting what you need? Where is the imbalance? And what can we do to redress the imbalance? Where can we get you into flow? Where can we get you into the most productive way? And like that with trauma, it upsets the balance so much that you need to find that balance again. And trust your member of staff, trust your colleague to have the resilience. They're the person they were before. They're now carrying this. You know, it's like if they appeared into work with something weighing them down on their shoulders, you're going to go along and give them a hand. If they're carrying too many bags, you're going, can I take one of those for you? It's as simple as that, in a sense.
That actually triggered another domino effect in my mind. So what if we also look at it from another perspective? What if the manager is the person who's experienced the traumatic effect?
Yes.
Right? So like, in this scenario, maybe their trust was betrayed, maybe God knows what. So you have to overcome that, right? As someone in that situation where you're responsible for other people. It's your responsibility in this situation to overcome your own problems. Not necessarily overcome. Maybe, you know, gaining trust becomes a little bit harder for other people to come into your circle. But at the same time, you always have to acknowledge that the person in the past that created the traumatic effect has nothing to do with the people in your office and on your team.
Exactly.
You know, so it's just a matter of acknowledgement of different situations and looking. And again, you know, like you said, the communication is a big factor. So asking your team to check in on you as the manager, there's nothing wrong with that. Say from time to time, I need you to check in with me. If I yell at you, if I'm angry at you, don't take it personally. Come in, let's have a conversation. Let me know I upset you and I'll handle it. You know?
Yeah. Take out an extra cup and bring me in a coffee.
Right.
And you don't even have to ask how the person is. Just go, look, you're a bit under pressure there. I thought you could use a bit of a caffeine hit. And you just don't know what kind of a dialogue, but that's having the emotional intelligence to be aware, because maybe if they get that from the manager, they'll give that back. And then that leads then to a development of an environment of understanding, and an environment where being vulnerable and being that way is welcomed, and it can be addressed, and it can be, you know, it can sit comfortably in the conversation, so that, like, and once you know the trust, and you know, if your peer or your colleague is coming in to show you that, sometimes that's fine. sometimes that simple act of, or just putting a hand on a shoulder and going, do you need anything? You don't even have to know. You don't even have to ask. But I think someone just
bring a
knows
bottle
that they
of water.
acknowledge.
Drop off a bottle of water. That's all I need to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just the acknowledgement of something's not quite right. I'm doing this little thing to fix it. It could make a huge difference. Make a huge difference, you know.
And I think everyone has gone through a traumatic event, even if they haven't realized it or won't admit it even to themselves. I think everyone, and it's way more common than people realize. Even if they've even experienced it themselves, they still don't realize that it's so common going through these traumatic events. You know, like you said, a traumatic event could be losing a family member, and that happens. That happens every day. You know, so you could come to work and just be angry, and maybe someone didn't go through the newspaper, so they don't know, and they just go about their day like normal, and you see it as them being insensitive rather than just another day, you know. So I think that the common theme here with leading post-traumatic growth in the workplace is that leadership doesn't have to be just from the manager. It has to be from everyone, building that environment of what you said, the empathy,
the PEC, the patience, empathy, and compassion.
Patience, empathy, and compassion. We have to understand each other. We have to understand that I had a bad night. I had a bad night's rest. A bad night's rest in itself is a traumatic experience.
If
of course, there's different levels of it, you know.
But patience, empathy, and compassion is so important. Like that, it could be divorce, it could be empty nest syndrome, it could be anything. It could be significant enough for to cause you an imbalance. And if you're going in knowing that you're going to get that patience, empathy, and compassion, then you won't dread the experience of work. You will possibly see work as your escape or your balance that you need, because you know it's a safe place to be you and to be vulnerable. And it's to even just, you know, having a room or having a space or having a place to get headspace, you know, to say to someone, I need a bit of headspace.
Right.
And it might be 5 minutes of that for someone to dive back in.
Right.
You know,
I've actually heard of these office buildings in Japan where they have these rooms where you can either just go break everything in there, or you can just go scream. They call it screaming rooms, I think. Yeah.
Brilliant. Into the pillow.
Into the pillow, yeah. Or I know there was one office building that I actually saw online, of course. And they went up. They have the roof. They have a nice garden space for like therapeutic causes, and a section of the roof is people to just go scream off the top of the roof
and let it all out.
And let it all out.
And don't wear it. It's like crying. They're like grief bubbles. That's what I call them. Someone, you know, if someone cries, or they might, or do you know the way it rises, because it rises so suddenly, and you're going, this isn't happening, and the more you resist it, the worse it becomes, and then it just comes out anyway. So it's like grief bubbles. It's like they need to pop, you know,
right.
and they need to get out, and it's like the pressure, if it doesn't, is just it would be too much to bear, and you're swallowing all that. Then it's just.
How many times are people on the way to work and they want to scream 1,000 times? You know, life is getting stressful and it's getting really fast paced, and the more it does, the more pressure we feel, you know, so it's very normal. And I think it needs to be normalized, you know,
it needs to be acknowledged. Yeah. That, you know, it's like, is it Nietzsche had the concept of the many faces we put on, you know, to turn up in life. We step into roles, we put on faces, and people never really see our true selves. And if you have to do that anyway, and then you have to do it, you have to put on a heavier face because of trauma, that will eventually wear you down. That will eventually drag you down to, down to a level that you can't cope with. So you've that wearing. So there's that pressure to be the person you need to be in the role you're stepping into. And then there's the pressure of this added thing you're carrying.
Right.
So there's all that, and there's all that weight. And that's where, like I describe it, like the luggage, that's where the luggage weighs you down.
Right.
And you go over the baggage allowance, and you go over the, and you just can't carry everything. You just can't.
Right. And
no matter how broad your shoulders are.
Well, I mean, at the office at Spartan, we're constantly like heated, debating what should we do. But I think because we let it out as we're working, we're actually very peaceful. We're very collaborative. We don't let it build up. We don't explode all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. So we're very collaborative. We don't mind having these heated conversations. And I think a lot of people need to understand that there's a difference between a heated conversation and an all-out argument.
There's a heated conversation that's constructive.
Right.
There's that, as Bob was saying the other week, was the intelligent disobedience. There's the intelligent disobedience debate, and then there's I loved that talk. It was fierce. It was fierce, interesting, and there's that concept, and there's the trashing it out and the brainstorming. But that's passionate. That's that's necessary. The thought progression or thought generation. Generating thought is a skill in itself. To generate thought in the meat, that needs to be done. And if, it needs to be passionate, and it needs to be, that's where the magic happens. That's where the fire, happens, and the ideas and the what was impossible is possible, and what you thought you couldn't achieve is achievable, and hey, let's do this. No, you're mad. Yes, that's just,
Yeah, man. Yeah, my veins coming out. It's okay. Ignore that. Let's just keep going.
I'm growing a second head. Don't worry about that.
That's just a symptom.
That's the thought generation coming out of me.
Right.
It's just bursting with ideas, and it comes out elsewhere. But you're right. It's out. It's out in the open. It's out on the table. It's examined. It's almost forensic in a sense. It's once it's out on the table, you can dissect it.
Dissect it, right?
Exactly.
I'm a big fan of brainstorming sessions, group brainstorming sessions for this reason. It's like we sit down, we put it on the board, and we just keep going, just keep throwing ideas. Even if we argue, keep going.
What company? Well, there's a company that has, if you say no to an idea, you have to. I read that somewhere that you have to write. Is it a 3-page or a 10-page justification to the no? If someone comes to you with a reasonable idea, you have to say yes, or if you say no, you have to write. I don't know where I read that, where someone has to.
It's true. Yeah. If you reject an idea, you got to justify why you're rejecting it.
Exactly. So
and it has to make sense. The rejection itself has to make sense to the rest of the team.
It does, absolutely. So it does, and that's constructive. Yes. and that's stepping outside the norm, and that's that thought generation where the juiciest grapes grow for the best wine, or the best ideas, and the trips into space.
No innovation has ever come to life without confrontation.
Absolutely.
Yes, and that includes internal confrontation.
Yes.
Between you and yourself, and really, like you said, that self-awareness
or fear of the unknown. I'm so sorry. I'm just do a slight adjustment here. Apologies, I just wrecked my office. But anyway.
That's fine.
Apologies.
That happens all the time when leaders talk.
I'm back up. I haven't collapsed. No, it's just my son arriving back now, and he could appear in a little head. It'd be like the Sky News correspondents. It'd be hi. So I just had to lock the door. So I didn't fall off the chair, and it was my bottle of water that fell. So I'm back. I'm fine. The things that happen in live interviews. Right.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. I think we're running near the end of the time, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I hope the audience did as well. If there's any words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with?
I think it's the patient sympathy and compassion, and I think that's applicable to every situation. Yeah.
100%. Thank you so much again, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Me too, Laith. Thanks a million.
Have a great day.
You too.